Hello and welcome to Hillbilly Cat History, where we're on our third episode about investigating the day that Elvis passed away, August 16th, 1977, and the mystery behind it. We are following our fictional character Joyce, who is an Elvis fan who lives in Memphis in 1977. And she is devastated by the news that Elvis is gone. This is August 16th. She has decided to keep a notebook and to follow everything that she can find in the public record about what has happened to Elvis so that she can solve this mystery of why a 42-year-old entertainer has passed away. So let's take a look at Joyce's notes and review what we've learned so far. So, of course, the first thing is who's who. You know, we've already got a cast of characters working here, and you can see many of them on the screen. Let's start off here at the top with Elvis Presley. Of course, that's why we're all here. He was the king of rock and roll, and on this day, something happened to him, and the radio has announced that he is gone. Winslow Chapman is the Memphis police director, and he's made a statement, and we can look at that statement in a second. Yeah, and somehow I've got him on here twice. But Dan Osborne, he's a CBS News reporter, and at this point, Joyce doesn't really know who's involved in the story, who's not involved in the story, so she's writing down everybody that she can. Because she wants to be able to keep track of everything that's happening. And what if one of these people ends up being important later on? And it's just like a homicide investigation. When the detectives walk in, they don't know who's important to the investigation and who's not. So they're going to write down everybody, and that's what she's done. And then I've actually made this mistake of writing it down twice, but we'll say that was Joyce in her excitement. And then she's also written down David Brinkley, who is the NBC News anchor. And we watched a report in the last one that he gave, and a lot of people talked in it, including Jerry Francisco, who is the Shelby County medical examiner, Murray Kaufman, who is a disc jockey, very famous, known as Murray the K, Steve Dunleavy, the author of Elvis What's Happened, Dave Marsh, who was the editor of Rolling Stone, Dr. George Nicopolis has been mentioned. We haven't actually heard from him, although we've heard secondhand statements that he's made. And he was Elvis's personal Memphis doctor, is the way he's being described, and Joe Esposito, Elvis's road manager. Let's take a look over here at what evidence we've actually gathered so far. And from the Memphis police, they've said that he went to the Baptist Hospital in respiratory distress, and that's where he passed away. And the next report we heard was that it was pretty much the same. And they identified that it was a hospital spokesman who was saying that he was in respiratory distress, but they also add that he collapsed at his home. So that means it was at Graceland. And then the Memphis Civil Defense Office confirms that Elvis was actually not alive on arrival, which we hadn't heard up to that point. Dan Osborne confirms that Memphis Civil Defense Office report, which is basically, he's just repeating it, and that he identifies it was the hospital vice president that said Elvis was suffering from respiratory distress. And he also identified problems that had been reported on in the past in the newspapers about Elvis, medical problems, including eye problems, a twisted colon, and exhaustion. So that's the first mention we've heard of the colon. Doug Poling reported that the Memphis Police Director Winslow Chapman said that Mr. Presley's personal physician, Dr. Nicopolis, was the one that called for the ambulance. He was the one that was with him when the ambulance arrived, and he is the doctor that pronounced him dead at Baptist Hospital. And as we talked about in the last episode, we know here in 2025 that not all of that statement is true, and this just exemplifies how these kind of rumors and misinformation, disinformation got started. Let's move down a few. Okay, let's look at David Brinkley. He reported that Elvis died in his bedroom, that Elvis was found unconscious on the floor of his bedroom by Joe Esposito. So now we've identified Joe Esposito into the story. Elvis was taken to Baptist Hospital 10 minutes from Graceland. So now we have an idea about where Baptist Hospital is. And that's actually a spot to take a look here at exactly where Baptist Hospital is. I'm going to pull it up, and we'll all be able to take a look at it together here. Okay, we're starting at Graceland in this video, and then it's going to take us into the air and over top of Memphis, directly to where Baptist Hospital was. Baptist Hospital is no longer there. It has been demolished. There is a new Baptist Hospital, but it is in a different location. So it's actually about 7 miles away, which is about 10 minutes. And so this is, I don't know the exact route the ambulance would have taken, but it would have been one of these roads that we're seeing here. And then as we come down on this empty lot, that's where Baptist Hospital was. Okay. David Brinkley's show, NBC, they also showed video of Shelby County Medical Examiner Jerry Francisco. And if you want to see that, you can definitely go back to the last video, and I encourage you to do that and watch that. Because he says the cause of death was cardiac arrhythmia due to undetermined causes. Several cardiovascular diseases were present, including hypertension, coronary artery disease. No evidence of excessive drug use, so not a drug overdose. Now, the coronary artery disease, it was mentioned earlier that they had found a disease during the autopsy, so something that they could only find when they had actually gone inside, and that is the coronary artery disease that Jerry Francisco is referencing in the clip that he's in. Now, that same broadcast, they show Murray Kaufman, who was a disc jockey known as Murray the K, and he says a lot of nice things about Elvis, but he also tells a story about that he was talking to Elvis about Bobby Darin, who died at a young age. And Elvis, according to Murray, told Murray that he did not expect to outlive the age at which his own mother, Gladys Presley, passed away, which would have been 46. Although Elvis may have thought of it as 42. There's confusion about who knew exactly what her age was. But this, I think, exemplifies where the stories about Elvis knowing that he was going to pass away start to come out. Here, Murray the K says, one time he told me that he didn't think he was going to live very long. And maybe that was a one-time thing that he said, but now Murray said it on national television on the day that Elvis has passed away. I don't know how many people saw that broadcast, but it was the whole nation and possibly the whole world. People were tuning in to everything they could find, any news they could find about Elvis Presley. So a lot of people would have seen this broadcast, and they would have left thinking that Elvis knew that he was going to pass away early. So this is just an interesting way to see history as it unfolds right in front of us in the videos. All right, let's look at what Steve Dunleavy said, Steve said that Elvis was a product of the drugstore. He took pills for everything. He had no more mountains to climb. But then Steve said that he can only speak for the time before the bodyguards were fired, so he knows nothing about Elvis's last year. So on this same program, where Murray said that Elvis knew he was going to die early, Steve has now said he was full of pills, and it's probably the pills that killed him, even though he doesn't really know. And I think we can see where a lot of stories are getting their impetus from. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Another guy that was on there, a third guy, and he said some beautiful things about Elvis. His name was Dave Marsh. He was a guy that worked for Rolling Stone magazine, and he later went on to write a book about Elvis. He said that in the 1960s, it took 10 people to represent to young people what in the 1950s was one Elvis, and that was 4 Beatles, 5 Rolling Stones, and 1 Bob Dylan to equal 1 Elvis. I just thought that was a beautiful statement. And Dr. George Nicopolis, he said that, and again, I don't think we've actually seen George. I don't think he was in that clip. I think they were referencing what he said, but that Elvis was taking drugs for hypertension, a colon disease that he had, and appetite suppressants. Dr. Nicopolis said none of these drugs were amphetamines and that none of these drugs played a role in the death. Both Francisco and Nicopolis agreed that the drugs did not play a part, but they did find traces of drugs during the autopsy. They sent those traces for tests. They're being performed elsewhere, and the results are due back in several days. And then Dr. Nick examined Elvis 4 or 5 days before this and declared him fit for a concert tour. So that's a really important piece of information. The same doctor who pronounced Elvis dead checked him out 4 or 5 days before, didn't find any signs of any issues other than his known medical problems, which were being controlled by drugs that Dr. Nicopolis was prescribing. And that's all of the evidence that we found so far. So now we can get into the meat and potatoes of today, and we're going to get to a video where Joe Esposito and Charlie Hodge make their first statements, but we're not there yet. So let's go to where we are. Just navigate around here. Okay. This clip has a woman named Rona Barrett, and I'm going to play the clip, and then I'm going to tell you who Rona is and how she fits into the story. And my belief is that this clip was actually on Good Morning America, August 16th, 1977, in the morning. So Elvis did not pass away, or was not found to have been passed away, until in the afternoon, Memphis time. And he wasn't declared dead to the public until around 4 p.m. And our fictional character Joyce heard it about 4:30, which is when a lot of people, like the mass majority of people, would have been learning that Elvis had passed away. But Rona was on Good Morning America that morning. She had a part-time gig with Good Morning America and came in often and talked about stuff. And she happened to be there to promote or talk about a book that she had seen, really promoting that book. And so let me play this clip. Let me just get it set up.
Warning, I upload this video only for historic reasons.
We need to skip some of this.
You know, in circumstances that are strange but true, just this morning I happened to be watching Good Morning America, and Rona Barrett came on, And at the time, she was talking about a new book. It's called Elvis, What Happened? And she revealed in her report on that book that Elvis had become involved in drugs, from Quaaludes to cocaine, and Rona is with us now. I understand that the latest reports have it that the police in Memphis are conducting an investigation, saying that there is now the possibility that he might have died of a drug overdose.
Yes, we were speaking with the police just a little while ago, Chuck, and they said that as a result of our report this morning, it led them to believe that perhaps something other than a heart attack led to that heart attack, and they do believe it was a drug overdose, as I do believe too.
Well, you know, Elvis was such a mysterious figure, his private life. I guess there could be a comparison between Elvis Presley and Howard Hughes in that respect.
Well, they were kind of reclusive in different ways, and of course, as you well know, Howard Hughes was also discovered to have been taking drugs, but his drugs were for arthritis and for other physical ailments. Elvis was not well in the last few years. I think we all knew it. Much of it had a great deal to do with his personal life. Much of it had to do with the change in the music business, his career taking a tumble, and then, of course, his resurgence again. But when your whole life is built up around a career and a music business, and you sort of have nothing left, and you live in an unreal world where you are constantly surrounded by what we call the Memphis Mafia, a number of bodyguards who constantly protected him morning, noon, and night, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You live in an unreal society, and you cannot cope with life as it really is, and eventually somebody...
Okay, so that was pretty amazing, right? So she's on there talking about drugs and pills, kind of pushing this narrative that Steve Dunleavy is also pushing, which we know is connected to the sales of the book, and is in direct contradiction to what Francisco and Nicopolis are both saying. So let's listen to some more of this.
It triggers you off with one little thing, and if you have that weak kind of personality, which Elvis really did, you sometimes can become a goner.
Rona, he was 42 years.
So if you have that weak kind of personality, which Elvis really did, I don't know that a lot of people would have described Elvis as having a weak personality. What do you guys think?
Years old.
Yes,
and
he was.
You think of people starting on drugs a little earlier than that. If they're going to be using drugs, isn't he? I mean, that's middle years. Am I being naive?
Yeah, he did, Anne.
Did he?
He started much earlier. He started, it began with Dexedrine when he was in the Army. And then it increased to heavier usage of all kinds of drugs in the more recent years.
This came as such a surprise to me. I don't know, did anybody else have any inkling that the man was ill or was having problems?
Chuck, they certainly were. People who were covering the entertainment industry and the record industry and Elvis's performance in Las Vegas were very aware that something was wrong. But there are many people who are frightened to speak out against drugs because drugs seem to be controlled by elements that we are often told to stay away from. And I think that there have been many reporters, unfortunately, in the United States who have been derelict in their duties in truly going after one of the major killers in our society today, drugs. And drugs, in my opinion, in the final analysis, will have been the real cause of Elvis's death.
Certainly have taken a lot of the lives of some of our biggest stars and our heroes and our heroines.
So I am definitely wrong about this having been on in the morning. So that's why I'm having trouble placing this. Obviously, Elvis was gone. So I think this might have been the morning of the 17th, the next day. I do believe Rona was on in the morning of the 16th, and she was promoting Steve Dunleavy's books because I found a few references to that, but I've not ever been able to find the clip other than this clip. But here she is saying that it is almost certainly the drugs, and she's sure it's going to be the drugs when it comes back. But of course, nothing's come back at this point. And these two correspondents or anchors, they're pushing back very hard, which I do enjoy seeing them push back. And, you know, the man said that he'd never even heard of Elvis taking drugs before. And, of course, Rona said that he takes Dexedrine and it started in the Army. And so she's identified a specific drug, a specific time. Of course, she's probably pulling that directly from Elvis, What Happened. And the lady here she's incredible. She obviously loves Elvis because she's defending.
Have died of drug overdose.
Yes, but they have also taken the lives of many other famous people and not so many famous people that you don't hear about.
Rona, what about, we've heard a lot about that he would gain considerable weight and that his performances weren't up to par. Is this all of this part
was
of it?
Very accurate. I remember when he made his comeback in Las Vegas at the Hilton. The night that he made the comeback, however, he was so brilliant, Chuck, I cannot possibly describe to you that brilliance. He was the old Elvis as we once knew him back in the late 50s and in the early 60s when he was really at the top of the heap, when he was the king of the rock and roll industry, of the music business, of the whole entire entertainment world. And then suddenly, shortly after his divorce from Priscilla, his world collapsed.
Did that do it? Was it the divorce that hit him so
It
hard?
contributed. It definitely contributed.
What has been the reaction from others?
It's been so devastating that my ears right now, I feel like they're like cauliflowers. The phones have not stopped ringing since early this afternoon when it was made official that Elvis had died. From around the country, entertainers, I have spoken with at least about 15 of them, and they're just in a state of shock. I mean, they are as shocked as they were over Freddie Prinze's death, and maybe even more so.
Was he working on a film or anything like this at the time, or was he going back out on tour?
No, he was at Graceland when he died. He was attempting to go back out on tour, but nothing was very concrete at this particular time. Elvis was very erratic right now in the last few appearances in Las Vegas.
So I don't know what she's going on about here, that it wasn't concrete. He was definitely going on tour, unless I've misheard what she said here. But just to let you know who this is, Rona Barrett was a gossip columnist. So she wrote a gossip column, and of course it's about celebrities, and it would be published in various newspapers, and she had some publications that went along with it, and she had this gig on Good Morning America where she basically came on and talked about the stuff that she was writing about in her gossip columns. So there were a lot of gossip personalities like this back then, and she was one of them, and she just happened to be in the right place at the right time when this happened to be able to jump on and do a couple of these interviews. And like she say, these celebrities were calling her about Elvis. I'm not sure why these celebrities would have been calling her about Elvis. I mean, I don't know what they thought she would have known about it, but it's another interesting piece of Elvis history and something that would have happened probably the morning after. So we're probably just a little bit ahead in the timeline, but let's go ahead and finish it out.
Vegas, he would walk on stage, he would behave very peculiarly, and he'd walk right off and he'd shout profanities at his audience, and they picked up and walked out, and they were very angry with him, and they didn't understand why, and of course no one could really tell why. I mean, those who reviewed tried to allude to what was happening, but it was dangerous. It was dangerous to come out and say, Elvis Presley is a drug addict and he needs help. Will somebody please help him, and will he help himself?
What about all the people who worked for him and with him?
Will they come out now?
Watch Good Morning America tomorrow.
Okay. And one final question here before we go. Do we know anything about the funeral arrangements or what's going to be handled? Will it be back there in Tennessee or here?
I believe it will be back in Memphis. That's all I can tell you at this moment, but I do not have the specific details at this hour. I probably will before the end of the evening is over.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rona,
Thank you both
for coming by.
So I think that last thing she said kind of nailed it down to August 17th, but they also said this is not Good Morning America. So I don't even know what show this is. And it's not labeled in the archive. So, but very interesting. And let's just take a look at the comments here. And Pat's saying that Priscilla had nothing to do with Elvis, so how can she say he got worse when Priscilla left him. It's nonsense, and I kind of agree. Unfortunately, our 1977 Elvis fan in Memphis, Joyce, she doesn't really know all these particulars about what Priscilla's done or what maybe she hasn't done or whatever. So she's absorbing all of this for the first time and trying to make sense of it. And so part of what I like to do is just think about how confusing it must have been for these people. So let's take a look at our next piece. So we're moving on to a different network. And this is going to be ABC. And this is an action news report. So this is actually in Memphis. So again, we can hope for a little bit better news because it's Memphis. Well, let's take a listen.
Tonight, his popularity was evident as fans turned out to buy his albums.
One of Peach's record store usually welcomes recording artists to Atlanta. Tonight, just a few hours after the death of Elvis Presley, the sign carries a far more serious message. Elvis Presley has been one of the giants of the recording industry. Tonight, after word of his death spread, many of his fans turned out at area record stores to buy his albums. At Peach's, more than 150 albums were sold in just a couple of hours. The stock started to run thin. Store management said a new shipment of Presley records is already on its way to Atlanta. Presley maintained a tremendous following from the beginning until the tragic end.
We are today, thanks to Elvis Presley, I think. The man that started it all. We all stayed behind him for a long time, and up until this afternoon.
So I don't want to get a copyright strike from that music playing in the background. So let's jump ahead a little bit. Let's see if they have any. There's a picture of Elvis with Dick Grobe. I don't think they've actually got any news on this.
In 1956, the King even appeared on these Elvis Presley trading cards.
Looking back.
Yeah, just a lot of copyright strike stuff. So we'll move on to our next. And this is a big one. So you can see Charlie Hodge right here. And we're actually going to get to hear directly from Charlie and Joe Esposito. Now, I do believe Joe and Charlie have both spoken to the press earlier in the day. So this is still August 16th. This is at night. It's been a long, long day. I believe Charlie and Joe have been at the hospital since Elvis was taken there. I don't think either one of them made it back to Graceland and came back to the hospital, although they might have. But I think they've just been there the whole time. And the reporters have been coming up to them. And we saw an earlier clip where Joe kind of was walking outside of Baptist Hospital and he kind of pushed him away. So as far as I can find, this is the first clip, video clip or audio clip I can find of where Joe and Charlie speak. There might be ones from before this. I would love to hear them if anybody knows of them. So feel free to leave that in the comments or and let me know, because I, again, love to hear those. But let's go ahead and listen to this one. Let me get this set up. All right, and this is Geraldo Rivera. I'm not a huge fan of Geraldo Rivera, but he makes his career off of this particular story, and we'll see that as we move forward. But this is where Geraldo enters.
ABC News presents Elvis, Love Me Tender.
Now in New York, here is Geraldo Rivera.
Good evening. Sad tidings tonight. Elvis Presley, late of Tupelo, Mississippi, Memphis, Tennessee, Las Vegas, and Beverly Hills, died today. He was only 42 years old, but while he lived, he revolutionized the music business, and in one way or another, he touched most of our lives. He was a truck driver in the early 50s who thought he could sing, and when he did at county fairs or at rinky-dink theaters in small southern towns, he made the crowds go crazy. The smart guys in the music business spotted him, signed him, and made the name Elvis part of the American folk history. Well, Elvis died today in the town he loved most. In Memphis, several men close to Presley in the last days held a news conference after a hospital spokesman described what happened to the 42-year-old singer.
Procedures, and the Memphis Fire Department ambulance continued these cardiopulmonary resuscitation.
So that probably confused some people for a moment. Especially in 1977, for a moment they flashed on the screen that this guy was Joe Esposito, the road manager. This is not Joe Esposito. This is a spokesman for the hospital, and it's probably that vice president that's been referred to in some earlier stories that said that Elvis came in with respiratory distress.
Procedures all the way into the emergency department. There will be a post-mortem examination done. The physician feels that the indication is that it's a possible heart attack, but we won't know until that examination has been completed.
Well, he was upstairs in his bedroom, and I went upstairs to talk to him.
Now, you have to admit that Joe looks terrible here. So again, I believe he's been at the hospital. He's been with Elvis since the moment he found him in the bathroom. And this is much later in the day, and it's just been one bad piece of news after another. Everything just keeps getting worse and worse for Joe.
He wasn't breathing. I got there. Was he lying on the bed?
Let's start this part over.
Completed.
Well, he was upstairs in his bedroom, and I went upstairs to talk to him, and he wasn't breathing. I got there. Was he lying on the bed? Responded over anything or anything? I have no idea. We're getting ready to do a tour starting tomorrow, and so he was in a very good mood, very fantastic mood last night. I talked to him last night, and we discussed some songs we were going to do on the tour and everything. He said, really good. Bill Health? Not whatsoever. How do you feel about that? I can't believe it. It's not real. It's not. It's our friend.
Elvis is dead, but this program won't be his obituary. Rather, this is a tribute to the man who brought passion and sensitivity to the world of rock and roll music. We begin with a look at his beginnings.
Then we don't want to see any of that. It's just a retrospect on Elvis's life. But I do want to talk about what Joe and Charlie said. I made some notes about it. It was pretty powerful. So let me pull up my notes so I can just make sure I get this right. So what Joe said, so let's look at the comments for a second, just take a break for our comments. And I see that people are talking about the bathroom and what it's like. Yeah, and the bathroom was it was part of Elvis's suite. And that bathroom was actually a bedroom that the walls had been changed in, and there had been I think there had already been a bathroom there, and the walls that were knocked out, and it was made into one large room, and that became Elvis's dressing room. And it included a bed. It had chairs. It had a very special, nice chair that Elvis really liked to sit in to read. It did have a special toilet. It had a special sink. It was a very nice bathroom. And that is not the same bathroom that Ginger Alden or Linda Thompson or Priscilla used. They had their own bathroom on that floor. And I will at some point bring out floor plans, and we will look closer at what the Graceland floor plan was like. I'm not going to do it right now because Joyce doesn't know this. Our fictional character, Joyce, she doesn't know what Graceland looks like upstairs. She's going to have to find it in a publication, or somebody's going to have to tell her somehow, or we're going to have to work it into the history so that we can explain how Joyce will know what it looks like upstairs. But for all of us here in 2025, that bathroom was a very large room. It was not a bathroom like probably in one of our houses. If they found me on the floor of my bathroom, I'd probably be sticking out of the bathroom because they don't have a very large bathroom, right? So, but this thing was a palace compared to, what I think most of us think of as a bathroom. But to get back to what, let's take a look at the rest of these chats. Pat says, in my opinion, Elvis was overworked, had so much stress because of Priscilla trying to take Graceland away and Elvis trying to pay everyone on the payroll. I think that Joyce is going to find that his payroll was very, very large, and a lot of people don't think about his entire payroll, or I believe that Elvis thought about the ancillary payroll, which was his indirect payroll, people he was not paying directly, people like the guys who sold the popcorn at the stadiums where he was going to perform, the people who Colonel employed to sell the merchandise, the police officers who got overtime in the city because they got to work the Elvis detail. All of these people were enriched by Elvis just being present, and I believe that he also had that responsibility on his shoulders. That was something he thought about, and that's one of the reasons he felt like he couldn't slow down and he couldn't take that vacation. But we're getting ahead of ourselves because, again, Joyce wouldn't know these things. Joyce is just now going to be, she just thought he was a happy guy out there doing what he wanted to do, giving the concerts, singing the songs that we all wanted to hear. And she's never really thought about what his entire life was like. And so that's going to all unfold as we get through this series. So let's get back to what Joe said. Joe said he was upstairs in the bedroom. I went upstairs to talk to him. He wasn't breathing when I got up there. So we're going to compare these kind of statements to statements that Joe's going to make later. These are not going to exactly agree, but I believe at this point in time, Joe's friend is just passed away, and Joe is trying to think about remaining diplomatic and protecting some privacy, and he doesn't know what to say, and he hasn't talked to anybody about it, and he's been frazzled, since these events started to occur. But he does not want anyone to know that Elvis was found in his bathroom, even though there have already been reports out there. We've already seen these reports that say he was found in the bathroom. But Joe doesn't know that because he hasn't been watching the reports. So he says he was upstairs in the bedroom. I went upstairs to talk to him. He wasn't breathing when I got up there. The journalist says, was he lying on the bed? And Joe says, yeah. So I don't think Joe's really saying, yes, he was in the bed. I think Joe's brushing past this question. Yeah. Let's move on. I don't really want to talk about where he was at. And then the journalist immediately moves on. I'm not sure why the journalist would move on like that, but he says, had he been despondent over anything? So the journalist, maybe I do know why he moved on. He moves on so that he can immediately get onto a narrative about why Elvis is gone, that maybe this was some kind of self-harm. Maybe he wanted this to happen because he'd been despondent over something. I mean, that's a weird question to ask immediately when nobody actually knows why he's died other than cardiac arrhythmia. And we don't know exactly when this interview took place. So we don't know if Dr. Francisco's already come out and made the announcement and Joe knows about that or not, or the journalist knows about that. But no one's said anything about anything that would have to do with Elvis being despondent. So it is a very odd question. And Joe says, I don't have any idea. I have no idea. We were getting ready to do a tour starting tomorrow. So he was in a very good mood. So Joe's saying he wasn't despondent, that he was happy that things were going well and he was living the life of Elvis, just like always. And this is the way that they did it. Charlie Hodge then jumps in and says he was in a fantastic mood last night. I talked to him last night. We discussed some songs we were going to do on the tour and everything. So Charlie's going on this tour as well. He's prepped for it. He's gotten the songs ready and together. He's got his list going. He's gone up there to confer with Elvis. They're all on the same page. Charlie may be overemphasizing fantastic mood, but I think both Charlie and Joe are immediately responding to this idea that Elvis was despondent over anything. That's not true. He may not have been the happiest person in the world at that moment, but he wasn't anywhere that would lead to this ending, right? And then the journalist says, was he in ill health? And Joe says, none whatsoever. The journalist says, how do you feel about this? Joe says, I can't believe it. It's not real. Charlie Hodge says, no, it's not. He's our friend. So I think what we do see here is two friends trying to protect Elvis, and they haven't even talked to each other about what they're supposed to say in these moments. And you can tell when you look at Joe's hair. Let's go back and look at Joe's hair. That this is a rough day.
It's not real. No, it's not.
Joyce says it's not.
It's our friend.
And so these two now have to take over damage control and determine what's going to be said and what's not going to be said. And this is on that night. And this really is the end of the broadcast for that day. So there isn't any more news for August 16th, 1977. Joyce has come to the end of the day. She's seen everything she can see. Now she knows that tomorrow, because of the way that the schedules work, the way that time zones work, British TV News is going to have something out before she ever gets up. So if she had a way to access that British TV News, she'd be able to watch it. Unfortunately, Joyce doesn't, but we do. So we are going to watch that British TV News in our next episode. That's where we're going to start. And then we're going to get into what Joyce also knows is going to be out there, a lot of newspapers. So the Memphis Commercial Appeal is going to print a huge article. And we're going to look at that article, and we're going to look at the front pages of newspapers across the nation. And one of the things we're going to see is that even though they're all getting their news from basically the same source, which is like the AP or the other one, I've forgotten the name, but they're the wires. They're getting them from 2, maybe 3 different sources. They don't print the entire article, or at least not all of it on the front page. They pick and choose, the editors do, to determine what they think is going to bring in their audience. So we see the story presented in different ways, even though a lot of them are working from essentially the same boilerplate. So they've just taken the paragraphs and mixed them around. And so we're going to kind of quickly work through those, and we're going to sift out all the different information that we can get, all the individual pieces, so that we can get them into Joyce's notebook. And those are kind of going to be the official pieces. We're going to compare those to what was said during the radio and the TV broadcast. But we're going to kind of go with what the paper says, because the papers put it in print and they've probably got sources to back this up. And we're going to see that they're kind of the king of the news cycle, but they're slow because you have to set them all up and you have to print them and then you have to sell them. Somebody's got to read them. But we're going to look at a whole bunch of these newspaper articles, and we're going to see how Vernon and the family and those that are left at Graceland, how they're dealing with this. We're going to hear from Vester Presley, because he's still out there at the gate and people are stopping and they're asking him a lot of stuff. And we're going to see how the crowds begin to gather, and the plans that are made for the funeral and for allowing people to see Elvis one last time. And that's all going to unfold over the next probably 2 or 3 episodes. But the next one's definitely going to be, it's going to start out with British TV News, and then we're going to get into that commercial appeal article, which is the biggest and the best because it was right there in Memphis and it's got the most detail. And then we're going to work our way through the rest of those. And so I have come to an end of what I've got planned for today. Let's take a look through the comments that are coming in. And Vincenzo, good to see you here. In her book, Ginger Alden says her and Elvis were talking about the wedding in the morning, so Elvis was in a good mood. Jen, good to see you here. And you say you'll never forget that day. I bet it was terrible. I was too young to remember it. I do remember some of the Memorial Days, the anniversary days in the future. And specifically around like 1980, 1981, they would print huge pieces in the newspaper, and it would be all over the television. But it couldn't have been anything like the actual day. And Pat's asking if Ginger's book is on Audible. I think it probably is. It's been out for a long time, Pat, so I'm sure that there's an Audible version of it. And then Terry's talking about, I think, the movie from 1981, which he's saying has 80% of this Elvis had real footage of him from the archives. Yes. Yeah, I was only 3 in 1974, but I definitely remember, the way that I really became an Elvis fan was somebody asked me, like, sometime in grade school, like, who was my favorite singer? And I didn't know any singers' names. I said, I don't know. So this was some adult, and they started asking me about different songs, and I didn't know. So they sang a couple to me. Every one that was Elvis, I knew. So I decided, that had to be my favorite singer because I knew all of his songs. And then it just kind of gone from there. And then Pat saying she was 11 years old and it was on the radio. And so that's how a lot of people found out. And that's how our fictional fan Joyce found out, was through the radio. And then it moved on into the TV. Then he started to read the newspapers. And then we'll eventually get to these books that start to get published. And we'll see how the books, they've had time to reflect and structure the narrative of the day the way they want it to be presented. And each of the books does this. They all do it. It's not singular to any one particular author or inner circle member or people who remember this or anything like that. It's just when you write a book, you take time to present the facts the way you want them. And there's possibly things in there that aren't facts. And so we're going to be able to see those. Those are going to pop right out now because we've seen the underlying source material. The movie Fun in Acapulco. Yep. That's a good one. Okay, guys. Well, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. I want to thank you all for joining me today. This was a great live stream. I'm really getting into this and loving learning how to do it. And I'm having a lot of fun going through these old archives. And every time I watch one of these, I've kind of glanced through most of them before. But as we sit here together, new things pop out at me, and those things are going to make it into Joyce's notebook. And this notebook's just going to continue to grow, and eventually it is going to be available for download. You guys will be able to just go out and get a copy of it for yourself. And then as we move through the internet and other places that talk about Elvis, you'll always have a resource to come back to say, hey, I know these things about this day. And that's it for me. I'm signing off. And everyone have a great day and keep on taking care of business.